Mr. Speaker, to attain food and nutrition security, I proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 54.6 billion for various programs under this sector. This includes Kenya shillings 10 billion for the fertilizer subsidy program, Kenya shillings 6.1 billion for the National Agricultural Value Chain Development Project, Kenya shillings 2.5 billion for the Enable Youth Program, Kenya shillings 2.4 billion for the Enable Youth and Women in Agriculture, Kenya shillings 747 million for small-scale irrigation value chain irrigation and value addition project, Kenya shillings 642.5 million for the food security and crop diversification project. Mr. Speaker, to improve livestock production, I propose Kenya shillings 2.4 billion for de-risking, inclusive and value enhancement of pastoral economies program, Kenya shillings 1.5 billion for livestock value chain support project, Kenya shillings 1.5 billion for Kenya livestock commercialization program, Kenya shillings 192.5 million for the embryo transfer project. I have also proposed Kenya shillings 300 million for the development leather industrial park, Kenani. Mr. Speaker, to support the growth of the brew economy, I propose a total of Kenya shillings 11.3 billion to the brew economy and fisheries subsector. This includes 3.7 billion to aquaculture business development project, Kenya shillings 3.1 billion to the Kenya Marine Fisheries and Socio-Economic Development Project, Kenya shillings 540 million for rehabilitation of fish rotting sites, Kenya shillings 695.5 million for Riwatoni Ultra-Modern Fish Hub, and Kenya shillings 600 million for marine fish assessment. Mr. Speaker, to raise agricultural productivity and enhance resilience to climate change risks in targeted smallholder farming and even pastoral communities, I propose an allocation of 340 million shillings towards adding drought and emergencies project. Mr. Speaker, to ensure legitimacy of RAD ownership and settle the RAD race, I propose a sum of 5.5 billion. This allocation will cater for the processing and registration of the title deeds, settlement of the RAD race, digitization of the RAD registry, geo-referencing of RAD parcels, and construction of RAD registries. Second, I want to turn to transforming micro, small, and medium enterprises economy. Mr. Speaker, accessibility and affordable credit to most Kenyans at the bottom of the pyramid remains a challenge. To address this challenge, the government is proposing an additional allocation of 5 billion shillings to the Financial Inclusion or Hustlers Fund to scale up access to credit for households and MSMEs. I also propose an additional 200 million for the Youth Enterprise Development Fund, Kenya shillings 162.5 million for the Center for Entrepreneurship Project, and Kenya shillings 1.9 billion for rural Kenya Financial Inclusion Facility. Third, let me turn to housing and settlement, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the government's commitment to turn the housing challenge into an economic opportunity to create quality jobs for the youth directly in the construction sector and indirectly through the production of building products. This will be achieved through, among other measures, facilitating a delivery of 200,000 houses per annum and enabling low-cost housing mortgages. To continue supporting this initiative, I have proposed an allocation of 92.1 billion shillings for the housing, urban development, and public works. This includes Kenya shillings 8.3 billion under the Kenya Urban Program, Kenya shillings 3 billion to Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company for enhancement of the company's capital as well as for lending to the primary mortgage lenders, Kenya shillings 32.5 billion for construction of affordable housing units, Kenya shillings 15 billion for the construction of social housing unit, Kenya shillings 14.7 billion for social and physical infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, other proposed allocation to the housing, urban development, and public works include 11.3 billion for the Kenya Informal Settlement Improvement Project Phase 3, Kenya shillings 1 billion for the construction of markets, Kenya shillings 1 billion for the National Slum Upgrading Program, Kenya shillings 1 billion for the construction of housing units for the National Police and Kenya prisons, Kenya shillings 496.3 million for the construction of food bridges, Kenya shillings 444 million targeted to support construction of county headquarters that are targeted. Fourth, universal health care coverage. Mr. Speaker, the government is committed and determined to realize the constitutional right to health by promoting access to quality and affordable health care through universal health care coverage program. Towards this end, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed an allocation of 127 billion to the health sector to support various activities and programs. These include 4.2 billion for Kenya shillings, 4.2 billion for universal health care coverage, coordination and management unit, Kenya shillings 2 billion for free maternity health care, Kenya shillings 3.6 billion for managed equipment services, Kenya shillings 861.5 million to provide medical cover for the orphans, elderly and severely disabled persons in our society, Kenya shillings 4.6 billion to cater for the stipend and acquisition of specialized medical equipment for the community health promoters, and 4.1 billion shillings for primary health care fund. Mr. Speaker, throughout the cases of HIV, AIDS, malaria and tuberculosis, and enhance the vaccines and immunization program in the country, I have proposed Kenya shillings 28.7 billion for the Global Fund and Kenya shillings 4.6 billion for vaccines and immunization programs, respectively. Mr. Speaker, to enhance the early diagnosis and management of cancer and reduce the burden of treatment among Kenyans, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 1.1 billion to strengthen cancer management in Kenyatta National Hospital and Kisii Level 5 hospitals. I have also proposed Kenya shillings 2 billion to the Emergencies, Chronic and Critical Illness Fund. Mr. Speaker, to improve health service delivery, I have proposed a sum of Kenya shillings 29.7 billion for Kenyatta National Hospital and Moi Teaching and Referral Hospitals. This includes 2.6 billion for the construction of Kenyatta National Hospital Burns and Pediatric Center. I've also proposed Kenya shillings 5.2 billion for the Kenya Medical Supplies Agency, Kenya shillings 2.5 billion for the Kenya Medical Research Institute, Kenya shillings 1 billion for procurement of family planning and reproductive health commodities, and Kenya shillings 760 million for procurement of equipment at the National Blood Transfusion Services. Further, to strengthen the capacity of medical personnel, I have proposed Kenya shillings 3.7 billion for medical interns, Kenya shillings 406 million for training of health personnel, and Kenya shillings 8.6 billion for Kenya Medical Training Center. Finally, the digital superhighway and creative economy. Mr. Speaker, investment in digital superhighway and creative economy continues to play a critical role in enabling the government achieve the objectives of bottom-up economic transformation agenda through increased productivity and competitiveness. On the creative economy promotion and of music, theater and graphic design, digital animation, fashion and craft, among others, continues to create jobs opportunities for the youth. Mr. Speaker, to support the growing digital superhighway and creative economy, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 16.3 billion to fund the initiatives in the information, communication, and technology sector. Specifically, this proposed allocation includes 1.1 billion for government shared services, 704 million for digital superhighway, 2.3 billion for the construction of Kenya Advanced Institute of Science and Technology at Concert Technopolis, 2.8 billion for Kenya Digital Economy Acceleration Project, and 2.8 billion for maintenance and rehabilitation of the last mile county connectivity network. In order to fast track the developments of the Concert Technopolis city, I have proposed an allocation of 1.5 billion for the horizontal infrastructure phase 1 and Kenya shillings 5.2 billion for the Concert data center and smart city facilities. Other key allocations to critical sectors supporting better include investment in critical infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, the government continues to expand and maintain critical infrastructure in roads, railways, sea, and airports to achieve socio-economic transformation that will also enhance Kenya's competitiveness and facilitate cross-border trade and regional integration. Towards this end, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 193.4 billion for development of roads. This includes 86.2 billion to support construction of roads and bridges, Kenya shillings 37.7 billion for the rehabilitation of roads, and Kenya shillings 69.5 billion for road maintenance. Mr. Speaker, to expand the railway transport and even associated infrastructure, I have proposed Kenya shillings 25.2 billion. I have also proposed Kenya shillings 2.4 billion for infrastructure development at Dogokudu Special Economic Zone, Kenya shillings 1 billion for Nairobi Bus Rapid Transport Project, Kenya shillings 316 million for promotion of e-mobility project, and Kenya shillings 239.4 billion for the development of Nairobi Railway City. To facilitate movement of goods and people in our inland waters, I have proposed an additional Kenya shillings 200 million for acquisition of ferries for Lake Victoria. Mr. Speaker, to scale up production of reliable and affordable energy, I have proposed an allocation of 69.7 billion to the energy subsector. This includes Kenya shillings 27.8 billion for the national grid system, Kenya shillings 24 billion for rural electrification, Kenya shillings 14 billion for the development of geothermal energy, Kenya shillings 2.2 billion for the alternative energy technologies, and Kenya shillings 920 million for the development of nuclear energy. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to improving education outcomes. The government continues to invest in education to improve education outcomes and create a level playing field for all Kenyan children. Mr. Speaker, from this end, I have proposed a total allocation of 656.6 billion, or 27.6% of total expenditures to the education sector. This includes Kenya shillings 358.2 billion to the Teachers Service Commission, Kenya shillings 142.3 billion for basic education, Kenya shillings 128 billion for higher education and research, Kenya shillings 30.7 billion for technical vocational education training. Mr. Speaker, the allocation of the education sector includes Kenya shillings 9.1 billion free primary education, 61.9 billion shillings for free day secondary education, Kenya shillings 30.7 billion for junior secondary school capitation, and Kenya shillings 5 billion for the examinations fee waiver. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 13.4 billion for the conversion of 46,000 junior secondary school interns to permanent and pensionable terms. Kenya shillings 1.3 billion for the training of teachers on competency-based curriculum, and Kenya shillings 360 million for the digital literacy program and ICT integration in our secondary schools. Mr. Speaker, to support infrastructure and infrastructure development and ensure safe learning in our schools, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 3.2 billion for primary and secondary schools infrastructure, Kenya shillings 1 billion for construction of classroom for junior secondary schools, and Kenya shillings 2.3 billion for the construction and equipping of technical training institutes and vocational training centers. Further, I have proposed Kenya shillings 11.1 billion for the Kenya Primary Education Equity in Learning Program, Kenya shilling 1.8 billion for construction of integrated resource centers, and Kenya shillings 1.5 billion for the Kenya Secondary Education Quality Improvement Project. Mr. Speaker, other proposed allocations to the education sector include Kenya shillings 1.1 billion for the research, science, and technology innovation. Mr. Speaker, the government is implementing the new funding model for public universities and TVET institutions through the provision of government scholarships and loans apportioned according to students' need. The new funding framework seeks to offer students whose households are at the bottom of the pyramid equal opportunity in accessing university education as well as technical training. Towards this end, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 35.9 billion to the Higher Education Loans Boards for provision of loans to university and TVET students, Kenya shillings 16.9 billion for the scholarship for university students, and Kenya shillings 7.7 billion capitation and scholarship for TVET students. Let me move now to supporting manufacturing for job creation. Mr. Speaker, further to promote local industries, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 23.7 billion under various implementing ministries, departments, and agencies. Out of these, 4.5 billion will support establishment of county integrated agro-industrial parks, Kenya shillings 1.9 billion for supporting access to finance and enterprise recovery SAFA project, Kenya shillings 1.1 billion for construction of investor sheds in Athi River, Kenya shillings 1.9 billion for establishment of 6 flagship export processing zones hubs, Kenya shillings 440 million to the development of special economic zones textile park in Naivasha, and Kenya shillings 1 billion for the Kenya Jobs Economic Transformation KJET. In addition, Mr. Speaker, in order to revitalize and maximize benefits from our cash crops, the government will make further investments towards revival and enhancement of output. In this respect, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed Kenya shillings 2 billion for Coffee Cherry Revolving Fund. This is in addition to Kenya shillings 4 billion allocated in the current fiscal year. Kenya shillings 1.5 billion for payments of debts owed to sugarcane farmers, arrears to employees, and maintenance of cane testing units. Kenya shillings 120 million for cotton industry revitalization project, and Kenya shillings 150 million for the pyrethrum industry recovery. Mr. Speaker, in order to reduce over-reliance of the importation of edible oils and encourage local production and processing, I have proposed Kenya shillings 90 million for the coconut industry revitalization project, Kenya shillings 260 million for the National Edible Oils Crop Promotion Project, and an allocation to National Agricultural Value Chain Development Project, which includes support for cashew nut development. Mr. Speaker, to enhance milk processing, I have proposed Kenya shillings 1.5 billion for excess milk mop-up, Kenya shilling 500 million for modernization of KCC milk factories, and Kenya shillings 250 million for the construction of a milk factory in Narok. Mr. Speaker, to equip our youth with essential training and internship opportunities, I have proposed an allocation of 1.3 billion for the Kenya Industry and Entrepreneurship Project, Kenya shillings 119.9 million for the construction of industrial research laboratories, and Kenya shillings 114.3 million for the constituency industrial development centers. I will now turn into improving security, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, enhanced national security creates an enabling environment for businesses to thrive while aiding faster economic recovery. It is in this regard, I have proposed an allocation of 377.5 billion to support the operations of the National Police Service, Defense, and National Intelligence Service and Prison Services. Mr. Speaker, the proposed allocations include Kenya shillings 173.1 billion for Defense, 110.6 billion for National Police Service, 46.3 billion for the National Intelligence Service, and Kenya shillings 32.7 billion for prison services. I have proposed an allocation of 13.9 billion to cater for leasing police motor vehicles and the modernization program. Mr. Speaker, to step up the war on crime and embrace support to administration of justice, I have proposed Kenya shillings 918.4 million to equip the National Forensic Laboratory. Protecting the vulnerable groups, Mr. Speaker, as a caring government, we shall continue to protect the vulnerable members of our society. I have in this regard proposed an allocation of 31.3 billion for social protection and affirmative actions in this budget. Mr. Speaker, out of this allocation, Kenya shillings 18.6 billion will cater for cash transfers to elderly persons, 7.9 billion for orphans and vulnerable children, Kenya shillings 1.2 billion for persons living with severe disabilities. Mr. Speaker, the proposed allocation includes 1.5 billion for the Kenya Hunger Safety Net Program, Kenya shillings 1.9 billion for the Kenya Social and Economic Inclusion Project. In addition, 815 million will go to Child Welfare Society of Kenya, 400 million to the Presidential Bursary for the orphans, Kenya shillings 600.1 million for National Council for Persons Living with Disabilities, and Kenya shillings 100 million for the National Albinism Support Program, and Kenya shillings 100 for National Autism Support Program. Let me turn to equity, poverty reduction, women and youth empowerment. Mr. Speaker, the most pressing challenge in our country at the moment is lack of jobs or job opportunities for the youth. This has been exacerbated by the multiple shocks that have hit our economy. And in order to empower the youth and support businesses owned by the youth and women, I have proposed Kenya shillings 89.5 billion for these initiatives. This allocation includes 10.4 billion for the National Youth Service, 1.1 billion for the Kenya Youth Empowerment Program, 200 million for the Youth Enterprise Development Fund, 162.5 billion for the Center for Entrepreneurship, 230 million for the establishment of youth empowerment centers, 2.7 million to National Youth Opportunity towards advancement, NYOTA. In addition, I have proposed Kenya shillings 649.8 million to strengthen the film industry in Kenya. Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to ensuring increased income for our women through employment creation and supporting women-led enterprises. And to further empower our women, I have proposed Kenya shillings 182.8 million for the Women Enterprise Fund, Kenya shillings 3.5 billion for the National Government Affirmative Action Fund. Mr. Speaker, to promote regional equity, reduce poverty, and enhance social development, I have proposed Kenya shillings 63 billion for the National Government Constituency Development Fund, as well as Kenya shillings 8 billion for the Equalization Fund to finance programs identified in marginal areas. Let me turn now to stimulating tourism, growth, sports, culture, and recreation and arts. Mr. Speaker, the government has prioritized expanding the space for creativity, including freedom of expression and protection of intellectual property rights. The government will also strengthen mainstreaming of arts and culture, infrastructure and support cultural production, and as well as creative economy. We are also cognizant of the brand value of Kenyans participating and excelling in international sports arena as incalculable. To support tourism, sports, culture, and even recreation, I have proposed an allocation of 23.7 billion, and this includes an allocation of 16.5 billion for the Sports, Arts, Social Development Fund, Kenya shillings 4.9 billion for the Tourism Fund, and Kenya shillings 2.2 billion for the Tourism Promotion Fund. Let me turn to environment protection, water and natural resources. Mr. Speaker, in order to support environment and water conservation and respond to climate change, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 10.7 billion for forest resources conservation and management, 1.7 billion for forest research and development, 2.7 billion for environment management and protection, 5.9 billion for the Kenya Financing Locally Led Climate Action Project, 1.6 billion for meteorological services, and Kenya shillings 13.1 billion for wildlife security, conservation, and management. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed Kenya shillings 1 billion for wildlife research and development, Kenya shillings 1.2 billion for human-wildlife conflict compensation, and Kenya shillings 800 million for wildlife insurance. Mr. Speaker, to expand and access clean and adequate water for domestic and agricultural use, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 36.6 billion for the water and sewerage infrastructure development, 12.5 billion for water resources management, and Kenya shillings 1.9 billion for water storage and flood control. In addition, I have proposed 17.8 billion for irrigation and land reclamation, Kenya shillings 1.9 billion for water harvesting and storage for irrigation. I now turn to improving governance and sustaining the fight against corruption. To enhance good governance and Mr. Speaker, and scale up fight against corruption, I have proposed